What if the fate of an entire war hinges on one region? Donbass, once Ukraine's industrial engine, has become the decisive center of gravity in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. As negotiations surface and battlefield momentum shifts, Moscow signals that full recognition of the region is non-negotiable, while Kyiv refuses to yield sovereign ground. President Volodymyr Zelensky warns the campaign could stretch for years with escalating costs. The stakes are no longer regional, they are strategic. Stay with us as we break down the power calculus shaping Eastern Europe's future. Subscribe now for sharp, fact-based updates. Everything converges here. Donbass is no longer just a regional flashpoint. It is the operational center of gravity in the Russia-Ukraine war. Comprising the Donetsk and Luhansk regions in eastern Ukraine, this territory has carried strategic weight for decades. Before 2014, the broader Donbass industrial basin accounted for roughly 16% of Ukraine's GDP and about 25% of its industrial output, according to pre-war Ukrainian economic data. Its coal reserves rank among the largest in Europe, and its steel, machinery, and rail infrastructure form the backbone of heavy industry. Since 2022, control of this terrain has shifted the battlefield dynamic. Russia currently holds most of Luhansk and a significant portion of Donetsk, turning the area into a prolonged zone of positional warfare. According to the Institute for the Study of War, advances in the region have been incremental, underscoring its defensive depth. But Donbass is more than factories and rail lines. It is leverage in negotiations, operational high ground in parts of Donetsk, and a corridor connecting southern and eastern fronts. Whoever consolidates control here reshapes not just the map, but the strategic balance of the war itself. The battlefield is only half the story. The real pressure is building at the negotiating table. In diplomatic channels reported around talks in Abu Dhabi, Moscow has reiterated a core demand: international recognition of its claimed sovereignty over Donetsk and Luhansk as a foundation for any lasting settlement. The position aligns with Russia's September 2022 annexation declarations following referendums held in 4 occupied regions, votes widely rejected by Kyiv and Western governments as illegitimate. The Kremlin's calculation is strategic. By formalizing territorial control, Moscow would convert military gains into legal and political leverage. Currently, Russia maintains control over nearly all of Luhansk and roughly 2/3 of Donetsk, according to multiple open-source battlefield assessments. Locking in those gains through negotiation would reduce uncertainty, secure supply corridors linking southern and eastern fronts, and strengthen Russia's bargaining posture. Kyiv's response remains firm. Sovereignty is non-negotiable. For Ukraine, accepting territorial recognition would redefine national borders under wartime conditions, a precedent with long-term implications. The gap between these positions is not tactical, it is structural. And as long as both sides anchor their strategy to Donbass, diplomacy remains constrained by realities on the ground. Kyiv is signaling endurance and a warning. In recent interviews, Volodymyr Zelensky argued that any attempt by Russia to secure full control of eastern Ukraine would demand a prolonged and resource-intensive campaign. He suggested the effort could stretch for years, emphasizing that incremental territorial gains have come slowly despite significant troop deployments. Independent estimates underscore the scale of the conflict. Western intelligence assessments and open-source analyses throughout 2023-2024 have indicated that combined casualties on both sides number in the hundreds of thousands. Figures that reflect the grinding nature of positional warfare rather than rapid maneuver campaigns. The fighting in Donetsk, in particular, has been characterized by fortified defensive lines built over nearly a decade. Zelensky's message is calibrated for both domestic and international audiences. Domestically, it reinforces resolve. Internationally, it frames the Eastern Front as a test of sustainability, not speed. The implication is clear: time, logistics, and industrial capacity matter as much as troop movements. If the campaign continues at its current tempo, the determining factor may not be a single breakthrough, but which side can sustain pressure longer under economic and military strain. At the heart of the war lies a simple reality: geography and industry still shape power. Donbass is not symbolic alone, it is structural. Before 2014, the broader Donbass basin produced roughly 90% of Ukraine's coal output and accounted for a significant share of its steel and heavy manufacturing capacity, according to Ukrainian government and World Bank-referenced economic data. This industrial density made the region central to energy supply chains and rail logistics across eastern Ukraine. Control of Donetsk and Luhansk also influences operational positioning. Parts of western Donetsk sit on elevated terrain compared to surrounding plains, offering observational and artillery advantages that have been reinforced by defensive networks constructed since 2014. These fortifications have complicated rapid advances and contributed to the slow-moving character of the front. Strategically, full consolidation of the region would secure overland connectivity between southern and eastern fronts, strengthening supply continuity. It would also reduce Ukraine's industrial footprint and alter its economic recovery trajectory. For Kyiv, retaining control preserves both territorial integrity and long-term production capacity. For Moscow, control represents strategic depth and bargaining leverage. In Donbass, economic infrastructure and military positioning intersect, and that intersection continues to. Momentum in Donbass has been measured in miles, not maps. Nearly 2 years into full-scale war, the front lines in eastern Ukraine have shifted gradually, reflecting the entrenched and fortified nature of the conflict. Russia controls almost all of Luhansk and an estimated 60–70% of Donetsk, according to assessments from the Institute for the Study of War and other open-source analysts. Yet advances have been incremental, often unfolding over months rather than days. This is no longer a maneuver war, it is a contest of endurance. Extensive trench systems, layered defensive positions, and dense minefields have slowed territorial changes. Western intelligence updates throughout 2023 and 2024 describe the fighting as attritional, with both sides committing significant artillery and manpower to hold or gain limited ground. Logistics and industrial output now weigh as heavily as tactical movement. Ammunition production rates, equipment replenishment cycles, and external military assistance increasingly shape operational tempo. In this environment, breakthroughs are rare and sustainability becomes decisive. The current battlefield picture suggests that control of Donbass will not be determined by speed alone, but by which side can maintain operational pressure over time while absorbing prolonged economic and military strain. Beyond strategy and supply lines, Donbass carries weight that cannot be measured in terrain alone. The region has long reflected a complex cultural and linguistic landscape. According to Ukraine's 2001 national census, roughly 74% of residents in Donetsk Oblast and 69% in Luhansk Oblast identified Russian as their native language, underscoring deep historical ties shaped during the Soviet industrial era. Vladimir Putin has repeatedly framed Russia's involvement as connected to protecting Russian-speaking communities. That narrative has been central to Moscow's public justification since 2014 and intensified following the 2022 escalation. However, linguistic identity does not automatically equate to political alignment. Surveys conducted before the full-scale invasion indicated that even in eastern regions, support for formal unification with Russia was not uniform and often represented a minority position. For Kyiv, the issue extends beyond language to sovereignty and internationally recognized borders. For Moscow, it intersects with historical memory and geopolitical orientation. Donbass therefore sits at the crossroads of identity and statehood, where history, culture, and power politics converge. In this conflict, territory is tangible, identity is layered, and in Donbass, both dimensions continue to shape the long-term stakes of the war. Donbass remains the pivot point where strategy, identity, and endurance collide. Military positioning, industrial capacity, and diplomatic leverage are all converging in one contested region. As both sides hold firm, the larger question remains: will this conflict ultimately be decided by negotiation or by sustained pressure on the ground? What do you think determines the outcome? Time, resources, or political will? Share your perspective in the comments below. If you found this analysis valuable, please like the video and subscribe for in-depth, fact-based coverage. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next update.